Welcome to the AI Security Update, hosted by Dr. Anmol Agarwal, where we break down the latest in AI and security with experts on the front lines, focused on what you need to know without the hype. Welcome to the AI Security Update, where we discuss the latest in AI and security. Today, I'm so excited to introduce our guest, Omar Sangurima. Omar is the co-host of the Cyber Metal podcast, and he is also a technology director at the Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. But go ahead, Omar. Can you please introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you. Thanks for having me. As you said, I work at the Memorial Sloan Kettering. I've been here. I just checked the other day. 7 years is going to be in May. Best decision I made career-wise. Just a great place to be, full of mission-driven folks that are a lot smarter than me. So it's just great to just get to work with a lot of those folks. Been in cyber for about 12 years now. So I wasn't born with the keyboard in my hand like some of the folks that I work with. It seems career switcher. Um, I started as a pen tester, because that was like the big thing. That was how to break in back then, and accidentally got into GRC. But best accident that happened, I think. Now I've been in GRC for about 8 of those 12 years. So I'd say probably more GRC than not these days. And of course, whether you're a pen tester or GRC or SOC analyst or threat hunter, AI is on the top of everyone's mind. So I'm happy to get into it today.
Yeah, thanks so much, Omar, for being on the show. The first question I have is that there's a lot of hype around AI security. What are your thoughts on that, on the hype that you see?
Well, I think the hype, sadly, and I don't want to get too political or economic, but the hype is just, I think, derives from the money. I think there's a lot of people that are betting or need AI to blow up in a good way in order to satisfy deep investments that they've made. I'm sure you've seen the same memes where a lot of the investments in that space are the surge protector plugged into itself. So it's very circular. You have one company giving money to the other company, but then the way that other company makes money is by doing things for the first company that's investing. So there's a lot of, I'm a big fan of Industry on HBO, and and I'm not giving away, I think, too many spoilers, right? We're mid-season, but the whole the whole trend in that show is a concept called round tripping, where you use your own money to drum up fake revenues and profits, and then you just keep going around and around. I'm not quite saying that it's straight up fraudulent there, but I feel that there's enough murkiness and enough technical depth with AI for folks to be led astray, I think, a little easier. It's kind of, I liken it to, my sister's an MD. So, I can follow her a couple of lines in when she starts describing a certain case. With no personal identifiers, of course. She follows HIPAA. She's a professional. But then 3 sentences in, she loses me. And I just have to trust her ethical integrity, and that she loves me, and that she's not going to lie to me or make me look foolish. But I don't think that there's the same amount of trust. So I think that the whole area lends itself to that hype. There's financial incentive for the hype. Then there's, of course, financial incentive on many sides. The investment side we covered. Folks, obviously, in security, this has been something that's been big in our industry for many years, right? The blinky box syndrome, where you have vendors that'll say, "Listen, I have the solution to all of your security problems, and we're just going to do it through AI." And even outside of security, I feel now so many marketing teams understand that they're going to get a pop. They're going to get some eyeballs if they just say, "We do everything we've done before now with AI." Even if you need it, even if you don't need it, even if it's critical to the use case. So there's a ton of information. There's a ton of mania. This reminds me a lot of, back in like the 1600s with the tulip mania, where it's just everything's bubbling up. So And I think that there are some very real cases, though, where it's doing some amazing, wild things that are just groundbreaking. So it's hard to kind of distinguish and understand and keep your finger on the pulse of what's real and what's not.
I think AI is also really helping us with certain use cases as
Yep,
well.
absolutely.
The challenge we're having is that data is everywhere. And so now companies, whenever they're working with data, they want to put AI as their solution. But actually, AI is a type of data analytics almost. So not everything is AI, but AI can be very useful when you have massive amounts of data and you don't know what you're looking at. Going back to the medical healthcare scenario, there are researchers that used AI to look at different proteins or to discover treatments for different medicines. Sometimes AI can really help, but again, it's understanding what you're actually getting from the vendor versus what is just hype.
Absolutely. I think you're spot on. There's amazing things. Even I'm excited for what a place like Sloan Kettering is gonna really do when it starts pumping out those use cases. But like you said, protein folding, discoveries along those lines, I think shortening the cycles of research and data needed to get drugs to market is gonna be huge. I think that you're gonna see just faster iterations of existing workflows, and not even that, but also probably, like, rediscovering new workflows altogether. There's transformative things that are gonna happen, but I feel that there's a lack of, I think, maybe, like, trusted authority that could help regular folks, and I consider myself regular folks, right? I'd love to be able to go to something and say, "Okay, give me the unvarnished, non-hype real deal on what this use case can do, not what you want it to do, not what you need it to do to blow up a valuation so you can hit an IPO, but tell me truly what's going on, what's within reach, right? Because I'll tell you what, my perspective changed after becoming a father, and now I start to think, what are the discoveries? Are there things that she's going to have to deal with on the negative side, obviously, right? Like what's going to happen with her job? What's going to happen? What's work going to look like when she hits the workforce? But then on the flip side, one of the things that's always in my mind, and maybe it's a little morbid, but I had cancer when I was a teenager. And, obviously it's always like a boogeyman, right? In the back of my head, right? Like so I'm all for the absolutely accelerative and transformative property of AI to hopefully have her never even have to think about that, right? Like that's always, in the back of my mind when folks at my job are like, "Wow, you're hard charging, you want to keep the pace up," and I'm like, "Listen, I got, she's 2 now. We got 14 years to figure out this cancer stuff, right? Just in case." So yeah, there's stuff there, but who can people go to get an unvarnished real breakdown, right? This is why, I love channels like your show where you're trying to kind of separate the noise from the hype because there's very real things that are happening. And I also think that the more you democratize that sort of discovery and that sort of science, you can get use cases, from regular, quote unquote, regular folks that are pretty transformative as well. But like, how are they going to know what tools are available if all they're getting is just marketing and hype sheets and prospectuses for investments, right? It's very, very difficult, and also how to protect themselves too, right? Like because there's negatives and positives. So I think the thing you're doing here is it's very crucial to help folks understand what's coming down the pipeline.
Yeah, I mean, you make a really great point, and I think so. I work in AI security research. I'm reading those research papers, those really long, dense research papers. But then how do we actually make that knowledge accessible to people who aren't in research? How do we share our findings with people outside of academia? That's another challenge we have. So, for example, generative AI, that's something we talked about natural language processing many, many years ago. Like I
Yeah.
would say even decades ago. This is something I learned in college, and my parents learned it as well. My parents' friends learned it as well. Natural language processing. So AI is ultimately an evolution of older technologies that we used in data science as well. And now we're seeing it explode, like you're saying, because everyone can access AI now. It's not just for a select few anymore. So when people use AI, generative AI, I find that they can also find answers to their questions a lot quicker. So if you have a question about something that you don't know anything about that topic, you can ask AI. It gives you a really good starting point. It might not give you the 100% accurate answer, but it does give you a good starting point. Like if you don't know anything about the FIFA World Cup, right?
That's a great example. Is it? Because
That's
I think my
so.
wife used that. I think she did a great thing there was the draw in December.
Mhm.
It was right around my birthday. So I love she set up a whole thing, right? I'm Hispanic, right? So Spanish origin. So she set up like a lot of, like Iberian ham and like it was
Okay.
great. And she did, but all the research she did to like understand how to do the sheet, right? So and I filled it out, right? It was a whole thing. The whole event was too long, wasn't it? Though it was like 3 hours of you only had like an hour of actual like who's playing who. But it was great. It was the middle of the day, right? I took the day off. It was amazing. But she used AI to and the stuff she was hitting me with of like, oh, so that team and that team they have to play in, right? And to get I was blown away. I was like, we've never talked about this. Right. I just love soccer, but we've never talked about this. So you're spot on. It can really open up huge avenues of just completely undiscovered. I never knew about XYZ. Let me just ask. And you can go down a rabbit hole right through that, evolved NLP, which are the LLMs now. And it's wild. You can become conversational. And yeah, it was really heartwarming. She did up a whole thing just to understand. And she always thinks there's too many tournaments in soccer. I don't know. Everyone's. I'm like, yeah. I mean, the players would agree. Some of them, but that's a spot on assessment.
So you work in the healthcare and medical industry, so I just want to dive into that for this episode because we are seeing that people are using AI to ask about medical information and about health advice. One recent announcement was about ChatGPT offering health services, and also Anthropic has their own health service as well where you can ask Claude a question about your medical information. So do you have any thoughts on that? On should people use those services or what they should be aware of when they use those services?
Sure. So my go-to gut is always going to be, and this is a bit of the pirate in me, is all information should be available, of course, right? So my initial instinct is yes. If it's a tool, if it's there, if it could help you, I think and this is no knock on WebMD, right? But I think it's maybe the AI now, those tools are a little bit more evolved in terms of, not everything is cancer, right? Like, that was the old joke with WebMD. I have a cough and I'm a little clammy. Well, you're gonna die. Right. So that it was a little bit sensationalist. Now, obviously, the tools are a little bit more nuanced and refined. What I've seen or what I'm seeing is that that's actually influencing now on the provider side. Doctors, clinicians of all stripes are understanding that an increasing amount of their patients are coming in armed with that knowledge. Well, again, as you stated, LLMs can get you about like maybe 85-90% there. There's still that critical 10%, and especially in healthcare use cases, that 10% could be life or death, could be patient harm or patient safety, which is why, I think the application of these tools in that setting have to be a bit more controlled, a bit more safeguarded, a little bit more locked down, some tighter guardrails because the margin for error is not, let's take the other use case we were just talking about, right? If my wife, miscategorizes, there's only, six groups, not eight or whatever for the World Cup draw. No big deal, right? We'll giggle about it. I'll appreciate her attempt. Awesome. If it's a thing where potentially that tool, an LLM, can tell a patient, hey, you don't need to come in. Don't worry about it. And then it turns out to be one of those edge cases that potentially, leads them down a path and they get hurt or, God forbid, they die. There is where I think you're going to start seeing need for tighter regulation. I'm seeing some of these tools self-regulate a little bit, where you got things like Anthropic coming out with its new constitution and updated. This is what we want cloud to do, and understanding. I think on the side of the LLM providers and distributors and deployers, that one of the primary use cases, and you know this more than I do, right? Because you're deeper in the space than I am. A lot of it, folks go to it for mental health issues, right? They need, that it's almost like a robot therapist. Now, again, it can be useful if there's guardrails. We've seen it go off the rails, and now there's pending legal action for a couple of the providers, where parents of folks that have, unfortunately taken their own lives, are suing the providers, the developers of these LLMs, going, listen, where the heck were, you know, look at the chat logs. This thing encouraged my kid to continue and to hide the fact that they were having this ideation. So it's very, very powerful, and I like where it can go and what I'm seeing. And it's like I said, working at MSK is one of those places where, you see like just brilliant people all the time. And so I'm excited, very excited at seeing what they're going to do with these amazing tools. It's going to be groundbreaking. There's going to be amazing stuff that's going to come out. But what I'm also seeing, which is giving me hope, is that, and I didn't quite see it. We'll say this: I didn't quite see it like when people were adopting the cloud, for example, because this is the closest kind of thing, and I think both our careers where we can go, Liz, okay, this was groundbreaking, this was evolutionary, this was transformative, was, on-prem to cloud, right? I don't think folks had enough of an understanding of potentially the security concerns of what that would mean, right? They were seeing that it was just going to cost us less, it was going to be scalable, we're going to have it on demand. It's kind of like going from, and this is, a personal case, right? I remember my grandma telling me about like how big a deal it was to have indoor plumbing, right? In Puerto Rico. She was like, you don't understand. Like having water that you could just turn on. It was wild. And I'll never forget it because it was nothing that, it wasn't close to me. I was living I was born in the States, and it was just like, I never thought of that, right? I never thought of like living without water. So, so that use case, I think then the security kind of got away from adopters with cloud, and we're seeing, shared responsibility model, all that fun stuff. We're still trying to kind of, get the genie back in the bottle. With AI, there's a bit more of an appreciation for how powerful this could be, especially in the medical field. And I think I would say 60-40, where 60% of folks are going, listen, we got to do this in a safe, cautionary way, right? There's still the 40% of, the providers and the sellers of things going, let's just throw AI at everything and make science amazing. But I think enough folks, and definitely at my institution, understand that, like, listen, these are amazing tools, but let's get some guardrails around them so that we could, kind of use them safely, and also use them because, as you know, if you put good brakes on a car, you can go faster. Right? That's what you can do. You can go 200 miles an hour if you know that, listen, those brakes are amazing, and if I got to turn or corner, I got this, right? So I think that there's a bit more of an appreciation there, thankfully, but the margin for error in the with medical use cases for AI is it can be razor thin. So I'm glad that that's there.
And when we try to add these guardrails, we're never going to be 100% correct.
Big deal.
And that's another challenge. And in the medical field, like you said, that could be life and death potentially. Sometimes I think of it like use AI as a tool, like a starting point,
Yes.
but then we need a doctor or a medical provider to check, like, is
Yep.
this correct or not? Like mental health, they have these mental health chatbots. And there's this debate that, okay, people who don't have access to mental health services, shouldn't they have access to something? Maybe they can't see a doctor or a provider where they live. So then the chatbot is better than nothing. But then at the same time, you would need a physician or a mental health professional to check and say, okay, is this the right thing, or are they leading the teenager down the wrong path?
Yep. And I think that for those cases, personally, this is completely personal bias. I would never want to see fully autonomous workflows for a lot of those use cases. Just as, flying cars, right? And hanging gardens, futuristic as either one of us can get. We're both in the technology field. So obviously, technology is a great tool for social good appeals to us. Right? We see the amazing things that could happen. But in those particular cases, I would always want human in the loop where, guardrails designed such that if these conversations, if these chats are starting to go down a certain path, there's built-in alerts going back to mental professional in that instance. Take a look at what's going on here. Start referring them or get in there or, make it such that they start having the chat with the individual versus it's the chatbot. Same as in the medical field where again, right, or the clinical aspects of things. I'd never want truly fully autonomous workflows for anything that's going to touch a patient. And I think that you could come up with like the concentric circle model where okay, these use cases are not these use cases maybe even less. And then of course, maybe for certain administrative things, fine. Right. If you can schedule and it's not gonna, things that aren't gonna immediately potentially result in that patient harm. I think what gets me excited or a little bit relieved in the medical field, there's already institutions and organizations from a regulatory stance that are built already there to go listen. If there's a sentinel event, a near miss or something that happened and resulted in direct patient harm, automatic investigation. We have to look at why, and then we have to look at systemically how the heck did this happen?
Whenever you sign up for an AI service or you get a tool to make your life better, like you said, administrative tasks, it's fine. But then what data is it touching? Is it touching patient data? So that's something I think everyone needs to be educated on is whenever you use this cool new AI tool, then what data or what access does it have? What permissions does it have? And I think that's something I think people have more awareness about now. I think with AI, we are seeing more people are aware of security as well. Because I think before AI, before we had generative AI, people weren't really having these conversations. It was the standard thing of we're invincible. Why would anyone care about our data? That's something we would have all the time. And I think now when I talk to people, everyone knows about security. Everyone's talking about security. And I think the rise of AI is helping that.
I agree. The one piece, and it's a mixed bag, right? Because I see some jurisdictions and governance, obviously, right? A GRC. So I'm going to always go to regs and rules and whatnot. What the EU is doing with the AI Act gives me hope. What's happening stateside, I don't know. It's one of those things where it's like, because, you know, it's, I'm studying for the AIGP right now, right? So I'm trying to get those tools. And the guy that I'm studying with, right, Dr. Kyle David, he had a nice intake thing and we had a chat, great program. And he revealed to me, he's like, listen, I would say that like the privacy exam for the US is one of the hardest ones simply because there's so many different laws and rules that you even have to take into account. You definitely, because there's different, there's ones for US, there's ones for Europe, China, AIGP, all that fun stuff. And he goes, but the one for Europe's not nearly as convoluted. Like it goes deeper because there's just less breadth. So I just, there's more awareness for sure. And thankfully, I think that on the provider, the deployer, the manufacturer, the developer side, as you said, there's more of an understanding that maybe if we, I'll go back to the example that I mentioned earlier. Hearing an Anthropic at least talk about this stuff matters and we're trying to do it ethically and we're trying to put guardrails is not to knock any company, but it's different than what you hear from like a Meta, right? Like it's different from what you hear. It's refreshingly so. Now, while I'm heartened by that, Anmol, for sure, I'm still worried that like that's voluntary in a lot of cases, right? As you said, what are these companies doing with data? What are, don't understand. Well, I hate like, and you know this, right? But I'm just saying it for the audience. Like a lot of the weird things that these companies do with your data are not technically illegal, at least not yet in certain jurisdictions, definitely in the US, because we don't have, a national privacy law. We have it maybe for HIPAA, we have it for certain types of data in certain niches, the PCI DSS, right? The card carriers got together and said, we're tired of having all this go nuts. We're gonna, and I would say that that was probably one of the most influential things to, I think, like build the internet, right? Because if nobody could pay over the internet safely, where the heck would all of these applications and use cases be? But it's crazy that that has to be voluntary. So while I agree, security's more at the forefront now with AI for sure because of what it can do. I'm still cynical or I'm still sad or depressed or whatever you want to call it, that it's not like a hard, you do this, you're going to lose 10% of your annual turnover or someone's going to jail because you were negligent with folks' data. Right. And I think that's still a place where, because of how fast AI can be, I don't think the guardrails are still enough in certain cases. What do you think?
So first thing I want to tell the audience is that if you're in the US, you should be aware that we don't have the privacy laws that the EU does. And we
Absolutely.
did touch this in a previous episode. I did talk about this in a previous episode. But my recommendation is if you want to learn about privacy law, every country has their own privacy laws, basically. But you notice that the EU GDPR, that's something we talk about because a lot of the countries are adopting the same principles almost as the GDPR. So if you look at the law in Japan or in Singapore or in India, they're all using GDPR as almost a framework or as a reference. So that's one piece of advice I have for people is if you're interested in privacy law, start with the GDPR, and then you can learn about your own countries of interest later, but start with the GDPR. And if you're in the US, then definitely it's a lot more you have to do because we have like so many different privacy laws.
Yeah,
Like Omar, you mentioned HIPAA, we have PCI DSS, and HIPAA doesn't apply all the time. It only applies for certain scenarios.
absolutely.
So we, if you're in the US, you should be aware that every use case or every time you're using your data, like whether it's for health, whether it's your credit card, you have a different law that's attached to it. And it depends on your jurisdiction too. So, for example, if you're in California, you have privacy laws if you live there. But then if you're in Texas, you have a different law. So every state is really different in the US. And I think that just goes down to our culture is that in the US, we have the states, they do with states' rights, they have their own laws and own ways of doing things. So I think that's one piece of advice I have for people is if you're in the US, for example, and you wanted to opt out of your data being used by a Meta, like an Instagram Meta, in the US, sometimes you can't opt out of your data being trained, but in the EU, they could. They could say, we don't want our data to be used to train an AI model. And why should you care about this? Well, because your pictures can be used to generate deep fakes or to generate more AI images, and you don't know how someone could use this information. Like if you look at Grok and what's happening with Grok, Grok, he has created these different things like, very obscene images. I'm trying to keep it
No,
family
no, but it's
friendly, but
wild
yeah,
stuff and
yeah.
what got me in that case was the delay between when everyone was putting up their hand and saying what abomination is going on with, and it just like again, family friendly, but just utterly disgusting things were
Yeah.
transpiring once it was let off the rails, which makes me super nervous for the fact that that's the sort of modeling that we're gonna build, AI satellites with, but that's a different that's a different conversation, right? Like, I'm gonna build them on the moon. I'll stop, but you see that and the delay there where everyone was just saying, "Hey," almost like a collective, "Whose mans is this? Like, what's going on here? Like, why?" And then and then thankfully, I think someone got him to come to his senses and said, "Yeah, this might be bad." Probably, the 2 lawyers that he hasn't fired were just like, "Listen, I'm gonna flip your car over. We need to this liability can sink the entire operation." But that's that's what can happen. And technically, though, the lawyers were probably wildly pissed at, like, the liability from the generation, but the training, I'm positive that in any of the, like, the terms of use, right, in order to sign up for X or sign up for XAI usage or Grok or whatever, say that we can do whatever the heck we want with your data. Like, you signing up for this service, and there's no authority in the United States that can tell them otherwise right now. So it's not illegal. It's turned out to be highly immoral. Anmol, it's definitely something I used to uh to talk to my family and say, "Listen, this is why I didn't let you take pictures of my kid, and I didn't let you post them." Right? Like,
Yeah.
this is why I'm trying to not um I'm not a weirdo. This is what happens, right? This is what eventually happens, and I don't know about you, but, like, do you see that? I don't see that changing.
No,
I don't see, like, somebody having the juice to make a national privacy law anytime soon.
I think in the US, that's going to be very, very difficult because of how we are in the US. I'm just thinking, even like marijuana, for example, that's an example of states did whatever they wanted to do. And then other states say, no, it's illegal. And then other states say, no, we don't care.
And so
That's,
and you can be on one trip, not a marijuana trip, but like a physical, like, you can be, and it could be illegal to have some here, okay, but in this amount over here, we don't know over here, and it's like, wait a second, you know, what do I do? What do I use? And, like, to your point, there's some states around me. I'm in New York. Massachusetts has seemingly figured it out, and they're generating wild amounts of revenue. Right? They said, you know what? Let's just get our arms around this and let's tax the heck out of it. And God bless. New York is still like, I don't know. Right? I remember the first time I was on my way to work off of Grand Central, and I was shocked that there were sales in the city because I hadn't known that it was, like, sort of legal and they had figured out somewhat how to, but then so, and I think that uncertainty, though, allows the space for sometimes less the, than, good integrity players to play games with the subject matter, right? In your point with the marijuana, but in our broader point with data. It's not, and I think that, yes, it's something to do with, like, states' rights and definitely, like, individuality, and, Texas doesn't wanna be told what to do by Massachusetts, right? We all know that, that's a big deal. But I also think that the lobbying that goes on, I think that there's a ton of, incentivized players in the field that are just gonna keep funding campaigns to just let you know what? You don't need to make a national privacy legislation. What are you talking about? No, that's gonna complicate things. It's gonna make it so much more and I think that, again, there's that incentivization piece that also comes into play, and who suffers? We do. I'm positive my data's out there. It doesn't drive me to not try to be secure with my transactions, but I am completely positive that my stuff being used to train something.
yeah, I mean, both of us are on LinkedIn. Our
Done.
data is out there. Both of us
Exactly.
host podcasts. Our data is out there.
100%. Yep.
But in this world, you have to be visible, right? It's just for your career and to market yourself, you have to put your data out there. I think it would be very difficult for someone to find a job if they didn't have, you know, an online presence.
And well, like word of mouth, like you've never met this guy, but I know him. Trust me. Like how would you right? Like you know that would be I mean that would be pretty cool. It would almost be like countercultural now at this point, just because
Yeah.
everyone's on LinkedIn. But the fact that you know almost like here's a card, you call this number, and this person shows up and like cleans your house or something. You know what I mean? Like almost like the Pulp Fiction, like the wolf type character. That'd be amazing. But you're right. It's an impossibility. Anybody that comes to me and says, "How do you break into cyber? How do you break into tech?" I say, "Hey, listen, get skills." But the next thing, immediately, the next thing I say is, while you're getting those skills, talk about getting them on LinkedIn, right? Like you can't you can't not. And we know in the hiring process now, right? That's a red flag. If you don't have a LinkedIn or you don't have some sort of presence to show that, you're not, secretly like a North Korean agent or something, like there has to be some verification there. And even then, right? Obviously that's some of that stuff's put out there and it's fake. But you're right. There's no getting around it. So, but I like your measured approach that there's no getting around it, but that still doesn't mean that you got to be like loosey goosey with your data either. I like the because I think you need to be both. Yeah.
It's like back in school. So this is showing how young I am, but back in school, they would give us this social media training. I think I was in middle school, and they said, don't just create a social media account. Like, here's all the bad things that could happen
Sure.
with cyberbullying and
Sure.
all of these things. So don't create a social media account on Facebook or Instagram. And instead, if you do have to create a social media account, make it private because anything you share on social media, it could be seen by the whole world. And this is something they told us back in like middle school. And I think that same advice still holds true today. But instead of just social media, think about AI as well. Is anytime you're sharing data to AI, what would happen if that data goes on the front page of a newspaper or on the front page of a website? What would you do?
I think that's great training because I would love all of my users to understand that concept. I would love I remember having that conversation with my mother when I was getting her on Gmail and like letting her know, hey, listen, you have like verify who you're talking to. She was very excited because she could talk to everybody back in Puerto Rico. I said, "But you have a phone." And she's like, "Listen, sometimes I don't wanna always, talk. I wanna send a message and then talk to them later." But it was a nice opened up my eyes to and honestly, it guides how I do security awareness even at the hospital, but just, like, f getting to people where they are and letting them know. And I think that regardless of the age, right? My mother obviously was a little older. I think the same sort of principles apply to even kids now, right? With social games and understanding that, hey, that username could be a person and that person could be lying to you, right? They could not be 9 years old. They could be 29 and just a weirdo. So be careful, be vigilant with what you share. I just think that it's very difficult, no, because I think that there's all these incentives to share. Social media, there's all these drives, and I think that that's being utilized to then say, "Hey, listen, just trust AI." Right? You'll get. Here's a good use case. I wanted to ask your opinion on this. I use Gemini. I pay for Gemini. Every chance it gets, it's asking me, "Listen, Omar, I could do so much more if you allowed me to look at every bit of data in your Gmail account or every bit of data in your Google presence." Every maybe every third time that I spin it up, it's like, "Personalized insights. We could be so much cooler friends." And I'm like, "Listen, man, I got all the friends I need. Like, just give me the answers I ask you for and stop being creepy." But I think that a lot of people would say, "Sure," right? Not knowing that then, like you said, all that data is then being used to train, and who knows the second, third, and fourth order effects from that training. We don't know. It's still too new. It's creepy.
Yeah. I'm someone whenever I use I try to create a fake Gmail. I create, disposable account just for
Yep,
an AI tool.
yep.
That's something I do because here's a use case I use Gemini for is I got a new house and I want to interior design my house and buy new furniture and look and see how does it fit into the space.
Mhm.
So Gemini actually did do a good job sometimes with, oh, you should try this sofa in your living room.
Yeah,
And it would look really nice with this color or that color. And so that was a really fun use case. But
yeah,
then I used a fake Gmail or I used a Gmail that doesn't tie to my bank account or my employer because I'm paranoid like that
yeah,
because I know of all the security
yeah,
issues and risk. But some people, they just want to use their regular Gmail. That's too much work. But still, you should limit the access that Gemini has. Because you don't know. One day, Google might have an announcement like, oh, they're using agentic AI now, and it will do everything for you. But then, how do you determine what data it's accessing and what it's doing?
yeah. I think it's a great use case because also then or example, I should say, because then it also now that if you didn't have those barriers and you weren't careful, then it knows the inside of your house. If you start getting wild, it can put those points together and go, "Oh, what I saw is her house, and this is where she lives. This is where she works." We're seeing that, and this is wild to me because it was an ad on the Super Bowl recently. But search party for the Ring cameras. How? Why is this like a positive? Like, oh, now, you can, neighborhood, and I get it's safety, it's security, it's the concept of, but you and I know that a lot of times, very quietly, a lot of these providers, a lot of these folks that are giving you these services don't even don't even wait for warrants to cooperate with authorities. There's a ton of instances where we learn after the fact, right? We look retrospectively and we go, "Oh yeah, Amazon worked with much local law enforcement, and they didn't even have to go through the process of getting a warrant to get this information. They were just trying to be good citizens." And and that's something I struggle with personally. I wanted to ask your take on it because I understand now, of course, like if my daughter was abducted, right? I'd want the, Will Smith level of all eyes everywhere. I'd want to find her immediately, right? Like I get that. But on the flip side, right, in order to provide that, what am I giving up? Right? Why is my license plate constantly read by this flock camera that we have now in a sleepy town in upstate New York? Right? Like, why? Right? Like, so, there's a give and take. And I personally don't, some of these use cases, I'm not like cut and dry on.
Yeah, I think that's something I learned when I was back in high school government class, right? We learned that you either have freedom or you have security, and it's always a trade off. And I think, Omar, that's exactly what we're seeing now, too. Using Ring as an example, right? There are some people, they have this backlash, like take down your Ring camera because they're cooperating with law enforcement. And some people don't support that. But then what's stopping other camera companies or other providers from doing the same thing?
I'll go back to again, the EU is one of the few areas that's explicitly line in the sand saying that this is unacceptable levels of risk for any AI model or system that eventually uses data to provide something like a social score. Straight away. There's other use cases in the EU that like even unacceptable levels for the AI Act, unacceptable, but there's carve outs, right? For, potentially if it's like exigent harm, if it's, military using for defense, if it's, if a kid's abducted and you're going to use facial recognition data right now, but not all the time, there's certain carve outs. None for this concept, right? China, 100%. I think the one example I love to bring up is there was when they were debuting the social scoring system, which is definitely possible and enabled by this level of surveillance and of course enhanced with AI. There was one poor lady kept getting traffic tickets and she like and her social score kept getting ding 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 and she goes, how, but like I'm not, but it was because her face was on a billboard on a bus in China. And it like, so anytime that like her image was getting picked up like jaywalking, they're like, listen, you're a bad citizen, right? Terrifying. I think that it's not quite at that level in the States, but the cases that are making me nervous are insurance, where, listen, if you let us track how you drive, we'll give you cheaper rates. On the face, sounds like a good trade off. I'm a great driver. I should get a benefit for it. What happens though when there's enough data that's aggregated and, maybe the law hasn't caught up with it where you can then deny people insurance coverage there? Maybe not as big of an issue in car insurance, that specific example, but then let's bring it out to health insurance. What if there's enough, like you said, AI scrubbing data, getting its arms around data? I loved how you said that, right? Where it was like an extension of data science, and AI is amazing because it can interpret a huge volume so much faster than we could, you or I could. But then what happens where you're denied, like maybe the first set of use cases there, or the first examples would be like life insurance potentially, right? Where it's like voluntary and it's an extra that you're getting and you can't quite get it. You lied on the application and the AI algorithm can find out that yes, you are in fact a smoker. So we're going to charge you $1 million extra for this life insurance policy. Great. Okay. But then what happens to health insurance, right? What happened? Like, without hard rules and lines that I think extend beyond just a state, we're going down a slippery slope, right? I just, what gets me concerned is, and thankfully I've seen the law kind of take a bit more of a stance here, but, geofence warrants made me nervous, are a thing that make me nervous. Where, just to break that down for folks is there's certain instances where law enforcement can say, listen, I want everyone's cell phone that was in this area at this time because it's going to help us investigate a crime. That is a broad net to utilize. And a lot of folks are unnecessarily then brought in and questioned simply because they were riding their bike near a cell phone tower at a certain hour where maybe 3 blocks away something bad was happening, right? That's the case. We're seeing this now. The use cases that worry me as well, can't get around it. Protesting. What happens when facial recognition is being beamed at folks that are protesting on? We can understand what I mean without me saying it, right? But like, there's a lot of protests going on right now. That's a little terrifying, right? Where the quote I heard in the New York Times a couple weeks ago sticks in my head. When you're put in jail for expressing a certain right, you don't have that right. So if technology and these use cases can assist or make very easy the violation of those rights that we have in this country, that's what worries me. And again, it's not, there's nothing stopping it at this point, right? You're in this space, so I'm positive you remember when Palantir was like first coming up. It would pitch to cities like, hey, listen, we can have eyes in the sky. We can track anyone that was outside of their house. So like any crimes that occur outside of a house, outside of a building, we can track, we can follow a lot of cities said no. Tons of cities were like, listen, that'd be pretty powerful. Great. But that's too creepy. Now, various government agencies, Palantir's doing great in terms of money wise, right there, because I think again, So, and what gets me is once that happens, there's no rolling that back, right? Like once facial recognition is being used and folks can then point to say, listen, because we had facial recognition, we found this murderer or we found this person, that did a horrible crime here and we found them quicker. How do you argue against that, right? I don't even want to be the person to stand up and say, listen, you know what? We got to let some murderers go free because, facial, like the argument's not compelling. Once it occurs, you can't unring the bell. I don't think. And so I think that's we're having a lot of AI use cases move the boundaries of what's acceptable, right? In terms of the safety and the freedom conundrum. And I don't think it comes the other way.
And I think we're seeing the technology is moving so fast, and we have startups now that are doing things that, yeah, on the face, it seems really cool, like you're saying. For example, recently I learned that there are actually ways that a startup is trying to analyze human thought. So it's trying to basically say someone is thinking about something. And then that just makes me think of the sci-fi movie, that sci-fi movie. I can't remember the name of it, where they predict someone's going to commit a crime before they
Minority
actually do.
Report,
Yes, Minority Report.
pre-crime.
Yeah,
Yep. That's what I was thinking. But like we can flip it the other way, Anmol, right? And by analyzing thought, you could potentially unlock people with like ALS or
yeah,
that are paralyzed at certain levels. And that's amazing, right? Who doesn't want to people you're I'm seeing like you can recreate someone's voice who had a stroke. You give them some data, like some recordings, and then they can, do it with their mind. And so then, and it's just that's phenomenal, groundbreaking, like science fiction 20 years ago type stuff. But
yeah.
at the same time, the initial thing of like, I can analyze thought is terrifying, right? Because you can go Minority Report, you can go 1984, right? Where you're
Hmm.
starting to do thought crime. And it's just, and in the hands, and what I try to say in a lot of these cases, regardless of what side of the political spectrum you're on, like, I don't want either side in this country to have that type of technology. Like, that scares me. Even if I maybe agree with the policies, that's still too much power. That's still grossly powerful technology in anyone's hands is gonna make them be creepy. It's just there's no way. And so that's what gets me, right? Like, right now, I might be arguing definitely on one side of the spectrum, but 5 years and the other side gets in power, like, I still don't want a government, especially with the lack of guardrails we have in this country, to curtail that power, to have this technology that allows them to do that. And like you said, it'll start with we can analyze thought and we can, have somebody that's like on the outside a vegetable have a conversation again. Wouldn't you want that? If I had a family member that had ALS and it was in the last stages or even multiple sclerosis, there's a ton of diseases where like you get just locked in. Of course I'd love to talk to them again. I completely understand that. Same as, I'll go personal. If I could give an AI, and I know there's things out there that can do this, like recordings of my dad, right? I'd love to talk to him again. It'd be phenomenal. What happens though then when you take that sort of technology and you turn it into like potentially it could be used to manipulate people? It could be used to maybe keep people like, I don't need to go out. I can just create my AI friends. That's not healthy. That's not
And
good,
that's
right?
what people are doing,
Yes.
AI girlfriends, AI pets, AI friends.
Listen, I said I was old enough to not have that many friends, but 99% of them are human beings. So still, right? Like I got my dogs, they're flesh and blood. I saw somebody sent me as a text the other day that in New York that there's going to be bars that like cater to folks with AI companions so that like you could go and to speak to the sci-fi part of it, right? For me, that brings up like Star Wars, where you can put in like a disc and then you have a hologram and then you're talking to a hologram. That's pretty dope, like on one side. But I would be worried to hang out with folks that are like, I don't want to hang out with them on the train. Like, homie, are you okay? Obviously not. Like, let's talk. Let's have a beer, you and I, as physical people. Like, but I think that's where we're headed, right? I think COVID kind of threw us all for a loop, and of course, because like AI is gonna come in, it's a use case. It could make money. Of course, they're gonna, but like to what end, and with what consequences for society?
Yeah. And I think you're completely correct about COVID. I think COVID changed the whole world. And some of it was positive, some of it maybe not so much.
For sure, for sure. It. Yeah, I remember walking through New York and being like, I can walk here during COVID, right? Because it was just not as much hustle and bustle. But to your point, then it led us down a path on certain things where, again, AI is going to come in and fill that gap. If there's money to be made, smart folks are going to go, hey, listen, there's a need, AI companionship. And I see the positive, though, on the other side, Enmo. Like, if you have lack of interaction is one of the big things that cause dementia in older people. So give them an AI buddy if folks aren't. So I think that's great. The use case I mentioned about like maybe it could help with grief for my father. I think, like, but again, where can and should are things that I think we haven't figured out quite yet in a lot of these instances. And I think that I hate to say this, but I think that that's going to burn us in certain cases. It's gonna hurt. Something's gonna happen. Like there's gonna just be bad order effects coming down the pipeline, right?
I think we have people in the technology space. Some of us are very cynical about AI, and then other people are extremely optimistic about AI. But then we need someone in the middle who says, okay, here's the good, but here's what you need to be cautious about.
Yep. 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 Yep.
I'm in the middle, but you see kind of both the good and the
Sure.
not so good. Yeah.
Absolutely. No, I'm with you. I'm with you. Like the good and the bad is there, I think, in many instances, but we haven't had hard conversations about, okay, let's get a set of principles that this is what we're gonna, let's have some sort of North Star and kind of guide this adoption of technology.
Yeah. Great points. So, Omar, we had such a great conversation. Is there anything else you would want to add about the challenges you see with AI security, specifically in healthcare?
I think that, speaking to my colleagues on the security side, try to do what you're doing, Enmol, and break it down for non-technical folks. I think that one of the sins that the security community routinely engages in is mistaking mistaking technical depth for, I think, like mistaking the technical depth for validation. And what I mean by that is that you can break concepts down and have everyone in the room understand where you're coming from. I think that is so crucially needed, especially in the AI space with how fast these things are going. But sometimes I see, not at MSK, I want to say that, right? The disclaimer. But sometimes I see in the community that we devolve into talking in technical jargon and really diving in, like you said, those dense white papers, the research papers, they're amazing. And when dealing with those sorts of ideas and problems and technological complexity, it's needed, right? But I had a mentor when I was doing my dissertation for my doctorate that said, if you can't explain this entire, and I think it was like 120 pages, it was, I aged many years making that, but like if you can't break this down in a paragraph, you really didn't earn that doctorate, right? Don't mistake going into the technical weeds for validation and for applicability and for helping society. You have to be able to break things down. So I love what you're doing with this podcast, and I think that kind of admonition to my peers, to our peers and our colleagues, I think would go a long way to helping everyone make informed decisions about a crucial technology.
Yeah, I think I aged several years with my defense as well.
Right?
It's like 120 pages. You go into the really like technical details of everything, and then my defense was 30 minutes. So I
Oh,
had
yeah.
30 minutes to summarize 120 pages.
Yeah, I remember.
And that's what you learn
Yeah.
is you go into the technical details, but then if you truly want to have a doctorate or you truly want to be an expert in the field, you need to be able to explain it to people that aren't in your field. Even if someone is asking you a fundamental question, you need to be able to articulate the fundamentals to them because ultimately everyone's using technology now. So we need everyone to not only be security aware, but also be AI aware as well. Like, how does AI work? How does security work?
That's a brilliant point.
So thank you so much, Omar. Are there any resources you recommend?
Well, I'm a big fan. Honestly, I'm getting turned on to the OECD principles on AI, again, studying for the AIGP, and it's just one of those things. I wouldn't wanna say, like, go and read the EU AI Act, but I wouldn't say not to. It's obviously, it's a piece of legislation. Sometimes it could be the cure for insomnia, right? Like, it's not like a great, like, riveting read, but seeing what folks are doing in that space and what they're trying to do, and maybe then taking it back to your own organization's use cases. If we don't have, national legislation here, then you got to be the change you want to see in the world, I guess. There, also a big fan of the OWASP top 10, more security related. That might be dense for non-technical folks to get into, but I love what they try to do, and I love that they keep those updated. I love that they have top 10s for different niches, right? They don't try to lump it all into here's our one top 10 for everything, right? You have web applications, now you have LLM stuff and podcasts like this. Honestly, like you love the tone you're setting and where like that sweet spot that you're trying to hit of, like you said, understanding the technical depth and being able to have that conversation, but also being able to bring it back for folks and breaking it down so they understand why it matters.
Thank you so much, Omar, for being on the show. This concludes our show, and we'll be back next time with more great conversations. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to the AI Security Update. No hype, just what you need to know. Subscribe to catch the latest episodes and connect with me, Dr. Anmol, on LinkedIn for more insights from the world of AI security. We'll see you next time.